What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and today we're going to be jumping back into mine and Julian's thoughts about Batman. Last episode we talked generally about what we thought about Batman as a concept, as a character, as a possible human being. And then we went on to talk about Julian's favourite Batman stories. We started to discuss the saga of Ra's al Ghul. In this episode, we're going to finish off that conversation. We're going to round out the saga, take it right up to modern day, and then we're going to jump into my favourite Batman story, the adventure that keeps me coming back to the Batman. So, not going to hold on much longer. Going to jump straight back into the conversation. I'll see you on the other side.
And a lot of the Grant Batman run strikes me as Grant really succeeding in that mold.
Oh, I agree. I love the Grant Morrison run. I think it's fantastic. I've been back and read it a couple of times, and it really stands up. But it stands up because it has that level of sort of, like I say, that grand adventure element to it. And I really like Grant Morrison's Batman because it is wacky and crazy, and you get the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, and he gives an excuse to sort of Batmite and everything else. I think it's such a good run, and it comes to that inevitable conclusion. When it comes to, and you get the fact that he introduces Batman Incorporated, and then Talia al Ghul sees that as a sort of almost a threat to her organisation, and it's fantastic. It's almost like it takes on that idea of almost like divorcing parents, sort of like trying to show who's got the better sort of global crime fighting organisation. It's amazing. Yes, I'm a bit.
Yeah, I always love Talia. I love the. I mean, she's got a little bit of, sort of Emma Peel in her, but, she's also got the kind of, like, Bond girl thing of, there is another universe in which Batman could lay down his burdens and be happy with somebody who was, this smart, this much of a physical specimen, but also in love with him.
I think that's weird because I totally agree that of late, obviously Tom King has sort of explored the relationship between Batman and Selina Kyle, Catwoman, and although I can sort of understand that on a certain level, I've always felt that Talia would be a much better match for Bruce. Just on every level, really. And she seems to have fallen out of continuity and fallen out of favour a little bit at the moment. But I do hope her and Raz come back at some point because I think they are fantastic characters that need exploring. Because there was a story recently, they did a Batman Eternal a couple of years ago as part of the New 52. And it was like 52 issues over a whole year, and it was like a Batman being taken apart over a year for whatever purpose. And there's a moment in that where he believes it's Ra's that's taking him apart, and he goes and tracks him down, and Ra's al Ghul's like, no, it's not me. I'm actually got other things going on. It's almost like you're not the only thing I've got going on.
Yeah, right.
And there's almost like there's a moment where it's almost like the arrogance of you, Batman, that you think all I do is plan your downfall. And it's just he's like no. And especially at this point, you've been defeated, you've been broken. If I'm coming for you, I'm coming for you at your best. So that's when you need to be worried, not now. yeah, don't worry about me. I've got other things on, and it's a really sort of like great moment for Raz as a character. Where he's just sort of like he literally just brushes him off, where he's just like, oh, just I'm busy, sort of thing. And I do like that about the character that he can be really like pinpoint focused, or he's got so much on that actually you're just a side part of his on his chessboard at that point.
Yeah, you do kind of feel like, I mean, I think that I feel like Ra's good Scholar in his own stories. He's one of the few villains who I feel like is fleshed out in that way, or is that interesting. I mean, like, obviously the Joker is interesting, but I don't know that I need a Joker solo thing. And I mean, the Joker's kind of, inconsistent and, crazy. I mean, I always felt like, okay, here's the Riddler, right? Here's the Penguin. And they're gimmicky, and Batman's got a great rogues gallery, and I'm not knocking it, but I don't really care about the Penguin. I don't really care about Killer Croc. I mean, I care about Catwoman, and, obviously she's been a good solo title, but Roz felt special, and I think it's so much fun doing this podcast and rereading this stuff for this podcast, because it's been a long time since I've just flatly enjoyed as many Batman stories as I have in preparation for this show. So much of it, you read the 60s stuff and you say, it's enjoyable, but, you're kind of analyzing it. And then I think the 80s stuff and some of the dark stuff, that's classics, I mean, you read Killing Joke and you think, oh, this is masterfully done, but, there are these issues with women, there's these issues with, how the story is structured, and you find yourself kind of going into analytic mode, or I do anyway, and that's definitely one of my problems as a human being, is that I have trouble just relaxing and enjoying something, and I've got to overanalyze everything. And I don't know when I've just been able to enjoy a Batman tale as much as I have this last week rereading all this stuff.
Well, no, I think you're right, because I've really enjoyed some stuff reading this and dipping into it and trying different things. Because you're right, some of the classics, the ones that people hold up as the almost like the be all and end all, the three you've mentioned, so Dark Knight Returns, Killing Joke, and like Arkham Asylum, they invite analysis. They don't. That's the point. They are a deconstruction in many ways of those characters. They are there to be analysed, and they're not there to be the rollicking adventure that I think sometimes you just need. You just you want to. You just want to go along and enjoy the ride, and enjoy the character and the interactions and the fun of it, really, that they can provide.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that I've gotten to my story now, but
yeah, please.
The things that the stories that you and I have chosen, neither of them are those top tier sort of deconstructive stories. And as you said, the reasons that you've chosen for the sort of the O'Neill stuff and that's basically the Ra's al Ghul saga is very similar to why I chose mine. I chose the sort of what was the first 11 issues of Batman from the DC New 52, written by Scott Snyder. It's the sort of the Court of Owls saga, and for me, this was a story where I'd read Batman before. I'd read the Grant Morrison stuff, I'd read other bits and pieces, and I'd read, as you said, those top tier pieces. But this was probably the first time I actually collected Batman month to month, and I was hugely absorbed in it. But it's just, it was really the mystery of it, and to see Batman as a detective, and done well as a detective, and taken to his limits was thrilling. It's such a good story in that respect, and it sort of it took away from that sort of like the punchy Batman that I was sort of I was quite used to, and introduced this Batman that sort of similar to sort of both the sort of the Grant Morrison and the O'Neill one, that's clearly got his shit together. Like, this guy knows, you know, I always feel with the Scott Snyder Batman that he has dealt with his grief and is now sort of working to a different goal. And I feel that in the sort of the Snyder, in the sort of the Court of Owls, it sort of shows it that he's moved aside that sort of thing of like, I'm avenging my parents, to I'm now trying to I'm now using my capabilities and my thing to deal with the problem in the best way that I see to deal with it. And it may not be the best, it may not be the right way, but it's the way I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities. I just think it's such a good story. Have you ever read it? Did you get around to reading it? Or
Oh yeah, I read it not long after it was published, and I reread it for the podcast. But it does, it does have a lot of sort of rollicking adventure at the same time. I mean, there are issues where I think it's like issue 8 or so where it begins with Batman is falling off a building, and you sort of circle around to catch up with that. But it does have that sort of sense of fun and adventure in the same way that both of them I was talking about my stories.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like it. I do like, because it's sort of there's a moment in the second issue. I mean, it's a moment in the first issue as well. Actually, there's a moment where it opens with him within Arkham Asylum, and you're a bit like, I don't know what's going on, and you see him and he's about to kick off a fight with Professor Pig, Killer Croc, the Riddler, all these other people. Like, he stood toe to toe with them, and he smiles, and it's that sort of thing of like, you said before, like, he enjoys this. Like, it's almost like not so much he's getting his jollies off, but it's the challenge of it. And then Snyder throws in the fact that the Joker sort of becomes he's almost like his tag team partner. He's fighting side by side, and just the way it's set up is like, what is going on? And then obviously it's revealed it's not the Joker. It's actually, spoilers. It's not. It's actually Dick Grayson was using some sort of technology to change his face, and then it sort of kicks off the mystery. But like you say, they never lose sense of pace or adventure in this story. That it's a mystery, and you've got to be invested in it. And much like as we said with sort of with Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, they work together as a creative team. I so feel it with sort of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo that they're not. It's not sort of. This never felt like Greg Capullo just drawing Scott Snyder's work. This felt like a creative team building something, which is another reason I sort of felt quite invested in it. And I don't know what your sort of, we said about the sort of the different type of Batman, but I don't know what your thoughts are on Greg Capullo's art.
I like it. I think I grew up with him reading him on Spawn. So I always read his Batman, and I think this is the Spawn guy, and I'm always like, looking at his art as kind of how it evolved from that. And I like it. I think he's good at telling a story. But maybe I have a little bit of baggage that I bring to it.
Yeah.
But he certainly knows how to. There's a kind of art to visual storytelling of sort of carrying the narrative forward in pictures that he's certainly very, very qualified, very good at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Capullo fan. I'm the same. One of the earliest comics I sort of got into in the 90s was Spawn, and it was Capullo's art that really hooked me. Because I'll be honest, it's not the greatest story, but the art on that was amazing. But yeah, no, the thing to say with the Court of Owls, it's I'm I'm a sucker for those stories as well about sort of an organisation or something, a society or something existing under the surface of every day, and sort of the idea of this thing existing, this idea, the idea thing of this, the Court of Owls existing in Gotham and having a level of influence, almost without Bruce's awareness until this point, really sort of, it, like you said with Ra's al Ghul being special, that's how I sort of feel about the Court of Owls. They're like, you can't trot these out every other week or every other month. They're there as a sort of, they're just there in the shadow. And some of the stuff, like you say, there were several buildings. Well, there's a moment in one of the issues where Bruce visits it's a Wayne Industries building, and part of the sort of superstition is you don't have a 13th floor. And so there's a sort of like a space, there's a larger space between the sort of between the 12th floor and the 14th floor. So there's a 13th gap, and then you find that actually that 13th gap is actually sort of been home to one of the Talons, one of the Court of Owls things. And so even within his own infrastructure, these things exist. They've nested, and it's sort of like, it's so well done that it really sort of played in my head. And then, when you... one of the best issues is... In fact, it was so funny, when it was published, I remember, I think it's issue 5, Batman's trapped in a maze, an underground maze, and he's dehydrated, and when he finds some water, he doesn't know it's laced with like a hallucinogen, and they actually decided to print sort of some of the pages went sort of from just being normal to then going sideways, and then eventually sort of the centre spread is upside down, and DC had to publish, they had to put out a statement saying, no, we did that on purpose. It's intentional. That's not a printing mistake. It's a part of the story. Just go with it. And they've maintained it in the future, reprints and stuff. But it's so good that sort of like where it goes, that they're willing to try those things, and the reveal at the end as well, which I probably won't reveal. The big twist at the end, but it's
You're
sort
talking of Court of Owls?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, I mean, I know you find out about the court, but you also find out sort of there's a guy in it called Lincoln March throughout, who has been sort of like played up as a sort of almost like similar to Hush, so almost similar to sort of like Tommy whatever his name is, who's Hush. He's almost like he's that equivalent of Bruce Wayne. He's that sort of thing where. It's almost like the what if, that sliding, he's played up as that sort of like sliding door scenario of like, well, this is what Bruce could have been, and then for his final reveal as to who he is, or possibly is, it's never sort of made 100% clear. Sod it, it's my podcast. Spoilers for everybody. It's revealed that he could possibly be Bruce Wayne's brother. But it's never sort of confirmed. He gives a story about how they were. There was a car crash and all this stuff happened, and he was taken away, and he was raised in an orphanage or in an institution, and he was visited by Martha Wayne. But you don't know if that's just an orphan that had that fantasy and that's what he's grown up with, or if actually that is the truth and he's that sort of, he's the lost Wayne sibling or other stuff. So it just plays like a really well orchestrated mystery, and topped off with Greg Capullo's fantastic art, and like I say, it's just a rollicking adventure that I think was such a statement of intent for that run of 50-60 issues. It rightfully stands up in one of the better parts of the DC New 52.
Well, it's amazing how adopted it's already been into DC continuity. I'm amazed that they have hardcover slipcase editions with the owl mask that you can buy in Barnes and Noble or whatever.
I would say I'm guilty of owning that. I actually have that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I sort of think like, wow, this is, I remember that story. I thought it was good, but like I don't know. Like it seems so recent to me. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right that it is a kind of statement of intent that, I think that I am not as enthusiastic about the Snyder run as other people seem to be, but I definitely admire it. And I think that, what you're getting at is this sense of, rollicking adventure, but also the sense of ambition. Like, I mean, right from the start, there is this sense of like, yeah, Snyder's going to push some buttons and do some stuff that's different. And, whether, you feel that the whole sort of like 60-issue run, works together as a whole is a separate story. I mean, we're going to get to the point where like Batman is replaced by a mecha.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to do some crazy stuff here. And I love that run is willing to do that. And, I mean, and I think Court of Owls struck me as that same kind of thing of like, especially with when you get into sort of like the history, like, oh, we've been here in Gotham since colonial times, and I mean, I'm old enough that I kind of have these sort of like retcon alert go up, I think like, oh, okay, I don't mind a retcon, but is that okay? And it kicks me a little into analysis mode, but it's ambitious as hell, man. That is some major stuff to be doing, in the first 12 issues of a rebooted continuity.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like, accessible to new readers, and it is, but you're definitely not spinning your wheel.
Oh no, and I think you're right. I think do I think the whole run is amazing? I think it has its ups and downs, but you're right. I think it's hugely ambitious, and there are having gone back and read sort of stuff, I mean, especially from the 90s and the early 2000s, I feel that Batman sort of fell into, even the stuff that surprised me, like Ed Brubaker, who I'm a huge fan of, some of his work he does with Sean Edwards, and when he did his Captain America run is tremendous. But when I read his Batman stuff, it just feels bland in many respects. I feel there's other writers that sort of they always talk about the Superman problem, like how do you write a good Superman because he can do anything, but then I think they've almost put themselves in the same corner with Batman. How do you write a good Batman story because he can do anything, and you end up with this sort of, as you said, the detective element sort of falls away, and you end up with punchy Batman who just sort of swings in, he can kick anybody's ass, and it's all done and dusted. And either that, or they have to go to the nth degree and burn Gotham City and Batman to the ground. It's either quite bland, or it's everything, and it became that cycle that I got quite bored of. So when you introduce this, that actually, when you read Court of Owls, it's the impact of this story on Batman, on Bruce, is massive, but the impact on Gotham City actually is pretty small on the grand scheme of things.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yes, at the end, towards the end of the story, they release this court of the Talons out onto the city, but they're dealt with in a night, and you're like, oh, okay, that's another thing. We just move on. And I always try and when I thought about this, I was like, if you were a resident of Gotham City, like, what things would stand up in your mind as being a big issue? Like, if you were to have these stories, like, is it every week, like, something's going down where someone's trying to, is Bane attacking, or the Joker's on the roost with gas again, or something's going on? Like, it can't be that level of intensity all the time. And it felt like that with this, that sort of with Snyder, that he wasn't trying to pull down Gotham, although Gotham City as an entity is a big part of it. It feels more like he's pulling it back into the Bat family. And so all the stories, they are impactful on a character level, or, and that sort of thing, but they're never, eventually they get there, but they're not he builds up to the city destroying stuff rather than just going, right, for this one, I'm going to level an entire city block and we'll go from there. It sort of it feels smaller and it gestates into something that's more impactful, which I really appreciated that it had that.
I love everything you're saying, and they had they even to that point, I mean, they even had was it Night of the Owls, this sort of like 1 month, 2 month kind of crossover where the various bat titles reflected that one night where the Talons are, it's like how did Catwoman deal with that? How did Nightwing deal with that? And they even did. There was an issue of All-Star Western, starring Jonah Hex that tied into that, and then not only is that like doing a crossover that is a sort of like more limited scope thing. But also they use that as an occasion to have different writers kind of explore the history of the Court of Owls and how they had been a part of Gotham's history all along.
Yeah, and I think that's what was it's so great that it was almost like you say, the invitation was out of like, okay, well, how did Nightwing deal with it? Like, as long as you reach this point, you start from this point and end at this point, we don't mind what happens in the middle, go crazy sort of thing. And there's some of those sort of that Night of the Owl stories are actually really good. I think the Nightwing one in particular I quite enjoyed. But there's a moment, the other thing as well is that there are panels in this story that are just sort of seared into my mind that I remember, that are just sort of having come off. So I mean, Snyder sort of follows up Grant Morrison. You sort of finish the Morrison run, you go into Snyder, and so you've got characters like sort of Damian Wayne in particular that sort of he has now got a reputation as being he's quite bratty, he's quite abrupt and sort of like he's very confident and sort of self-assured. But there's a moment in this where that is reflected. But then there's also a moment when you find out that Batman's been missing for like several days or whatever, and the police are about to sort of stop the search, and Damian Wayne sort of demands like, no, you will look for him, and then his shoulders slump. He says, please, and it's that sort of thing. It's just a really good sort of emotional moment of a son sort of like, I can't do this on my own, but I need your help. And I think that's one of the things I like about Snyder, that the characters, there's no one he doesn't want to sort of play up. Do you know what I mean? They're all.
And I think Snyder has a lot of moments like that. He's very good at, telling these rollicking tales that, it's interesting to me. Like, they don't have, like, both of us have identified stories that are kind of rollicking and fun. But, like the Snyder stuff, and in fairness, like, O'Neill is a mixed bag too. But the Snyder stuff, like, it deals with, like, theme differently. Like, Snyder has, like, these like you said, like, these moments where they're so revealing of character, or they just seem like such a perfect moment, or a sort of, like, motif for that particular issue of kind of looping back in time and kind of bookending, the story, in interesting ways. But it doesn't have, like, the sort of classic sense of theme that I sort of look for. And maybe that's something that I just had a prejudice, because you're right that he does deal with character in these wonderful little gestures, even through the whole run. I mean, there are just these little moments that are just perfect, where you just think, well, that's really, really good. I'm not sure how much I love this story or I love this issue, but that is a perfect page,
Yeah, and that's it. There are like panels and pages, like you say. And I think the other one, just to mention, after sort of Court of Owls, I think is Death of the Family is another one where he went, all out, and that links back to it was issue number 1 of I think it was either, I don't know if it was Detective or whichever one they did, but they obviously redid all of them, and it's the one where the doll maker cuts off Joker's face. And at the end of the issue is the Joker's face has been nailed to a wall, and that's it. And you're a bit like, I remember when this happened, you were like, wow, what is that about? How is that going to come back? And it didn't for ages. Like nothing happened. There was lots of speculation, and then you find out that Scott Snyder's going to pick up the ball with that and run with it, and you get an issue, the first issue of Death of the Family. I think it's issue 21 or 22 of his run, and it starts with a completely silhouetted, or a Joker completely in darkness, apart from his eyes and part of his smile, and then he attacks the Gotham GCPD police department, where his face has been kept in as evidence, and it is one of the most frightening, horrific attacks that It's the Joker that's scarier than I've ever seen him, and it's you see about these moments in time that define a character. I love the Joker, and I think I think it's like the Killing Joke, and you think of other things where he's been horrific, but this is him as Freddy Krueger. This is him as Pennywise the Clown. This is him as a horror icon, and again, this is where I think Capullo's time on Spawn pays off, and it's just to say it's wonderful. To say it's wonderful seems sort of really macabre, but it's so well done. It's just sort of it's fun in a really horrific way. It gives you that thrill of like, oh my god, am I reading this?
I totally get that, and I think when I think of Snyder's run, I mean, I was really disappointed with the Joker Endgame arc, but I love Death of the Family, and I mean, there's things that I kind of quibble about it, kind of cutting off Alfred's his hand, right? But man, I mean, every issue of Death of the Family sits in my mind as like, wow, they're really upping the ante. Like, I can't believe they're doing this. And it is kind of a sort of like Joker as horror figure, sort of like Joker Unleashed. And there is just that same, like you said, the sort of rollicking sense of like, where are they going with this? How are they going to resolve this? What am I even reading? And so rarely do we get that from comics nowadays.
And that's it. And I think I mean, if I think about, I think back on that run, I think about reading it month in, month out, and the end of that issue, the end of that arc, Death of the Family. There are moments in that, he enters Arkham Asylum and they are it is a horror. It's a horror maze. Like they've got people, they've got bodies sewn together as a tapestry of one of of Batman and the Joker's first encounters, and it is a horrific image. It's beautifully illustrated by Capullo, but also you're looking at it and you're going, oh yeah, look, there's the laughing fish. Oh look, there's this, and you're looking for things on it, and you can't look away from it. And then so you are looking, you're flipping from page to page, thinking this is going to be horrendous. But then there's also a panel in that where Batman punches out a horse, and you're like, that's amazing. Yeah. And it breaks that tension.
Yeah, I remember that the dinner scene. And just thinking like, my God, what am I reading? This is. I mean, you really do have the sense there. I mean, of sort of not just Joker Unleashed, but of this is the final Joker story. Like, how do you go past this? This mean, it's there in Killing Joke of sort of like, if this goes on, one of us is going to die. And I think, like, you know, after Killing Joke, it's hard to do a really fantastic Joker story. You know, obviously he's killed Robin. I mean, you know, you've upped the ante so much with the Joker. That, you know, how do you one-up that? And, you know, Snyder manages to do it. And it's crazy and it's off the wall, but it is gripping and stunning and, you know, you can't wait to read the next page.
Yeah, and like you say, it's he said about that the dinner scene, and it's so, because you know everyone sort of says like the Joker is an anarchist and all sorts of things, but it's so meticulously well planned, and I mean again I remember sort of like, you know, and I don't see this as much anymore. I was literally just talking to someone about this the other day. That on comic book sites now, I don't see these speculation articles that I saw around certain other runs in the past. But there was the dinner scene, it ends where there's a reveal where each of the Bat family have been captured, and they're all got their faces bandaged up. And people were speculating, like, right, who's going to die? Who's lost their face? Who's been disfigured? What's happened? Like, Snyder had taken it to a point where, yeah, it might happen. Like, Nightwing may continue without a face, or he may continue with a disfigurement. Like, there was at that point, people, like, I've read articles on sort of like, you know, your comic book websites where people were literally speculating, are we going to have a series where Nightwing is going to go forwards with a disfigurement or with a mask that's going to hide his face? Like, there was real... And I was just like you say, it was getting to that point where people didn't know what could come next because of everything that had already happened had been so like, well, that's so out of the blue. And then again, like I say, they bring in Damian Wayne, that when they take the bandages off to reveal actually they're actually all fine, they're okay, is that moment where Damian's like, is it okay? I can't feel my face.
Right.
And it's horrific. And like you say, he also plays it like the anger that Bruce has, at feeling almost the vulnerability it takes him to. Again, like, but if you're a citizen of Gotham City, none of that impacts on you. Like, there's no city destroying event. There's no you know, huge burning battle that runs through the streets. It just keeps impacting on Batman. It just keeps hitting him. So, and that's why I really enjoy it. That's why I think, like you say, that there's that adventure of, it takes it down a notch as it on that, you know, on that sort of scope, but actually the emotional impact and the actual story impact is massive. So yeah,
I agree with all of that. I mean, and I think that's often the case. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions lately about how, you know, how something like Jessica Jones feels. You know, I feel a sense of stakes through that whole TV series that I don't when, you know, Ultron is prepared to destroy the Earth. I don't care. And you're right, you know, not only do you feel that sense of stakes in Snyder's Batman run, but, you know, the reason why I have that same sense of, like, okay, who's going to be missing their face, is because, you know, which is admittedly a really macabre thing to be thinking about, it's because Snyder's taken so many just what is going on risks and ambitious moves throughout. I mean, at that point, we're 20-some issues in, and, you know, he's earned that scene.
Yes. Yeah. It was incredible. I remember sort of, like you say, there was, you know, that sort of need to keep getting that next issue and find out what is going on. And I do think, like you say, the story that over sort of 50, whatever it is, 52, 53 issues, eventually gets a little bloated and sort of like you say, Endgame again has its moments. There are some fantastic moments in that story, And again, I love the concept of Bruce having to sacrifice a normal life to take on the mantle, because only Batman can take down the Joker. And I like the sort of the themes in that, but it doesn't stick the landing in the way I would like it to have done, which is a bit of a shame.
But I think that's what the family does.
Yeah.
And I think the whole sort of first 12 issues work together and don't have that same problem. And I will say, I mean, you're sort of convincing me. Both because I'm sort of remembering how much there are those moments throughout Snyder's run that are just so perfect. But also that sense of like when I'm talking about rollicking adventure, with the Ross stories, I mean, I'm talking about like a 3-parter or a 17-page story or, a graphic novel. I mean, you're talking about sustaining that over the course of 60 issues. And that sense of, just reading comics monthly and saying, what the hell is happening next? I read all of it in collection. So for me it was a different experience. But it does have that sense of just sort of like, it never kind of like occurred to me that rollicking adventure, there's the kind of like rollicking adventure within the story of like, now we're in the Himalayas. But then there's also the sort of like rollicking adventure of, I have no idea what the next issue is going to hold that comics used to have, and that has largely disappeared. But I think you're right that Snyder certainly brought back, and I remember the internet speculation.
Yeah, it felt like a pulp adventure. That cliffhanger moment, whether it be like a, same back time, same back channel. It was like, well, what the hell's going to happen next? It was, and I think the thing is, there's been other runs, and I think Tom King's current run on Batman, I started reading and I dropped off very quickly because of a similar thing of the stakes the first 2 arcs in it are actually quite good, and then it sort of gets into, I think it's about either the 3rd or 4th one in, and it's called the War of Jokes and Riddles, and it depicts a sort of a gang war between a Joker gang and the Riddler gang, and it's supposed to have lasted like months at some point in the Batman history. But it's so sort of almost like a villain civil war level event that you'd almost be like, well, something like this, like they wouldn't be going to an asylum anymore. There would have been executions. There would have been, people would be in a sort of like in a max security prison, like somewhere like this is ridiculous to a level where I'm like, I can't see how anything's ever going to happen after this. Like it becomes too, and I dropped off after that because the stakes just become silly. You're like,
civilians are just going to be. There's a guy on the street. Everybody's going to be like the Punisher now. Like,
yeah,
you put our city through hell. Every citizen is armed and ready to kill.
I swear to God, there's a moment in the story in the War of Jokes and Riddles. There's a 4-page, maybe shorter than that, maybe 3 pages, but it depicts a 3-day gun battle between Deathstroke and Deadshot. And I'm thinking, how many Punishers and Batman were born out of this running gun battle that lasted 3 days? Like, that was the moment in that story where I was like, I'm done, I'm out. This is where the like you said, the Age of Ultron sort of thing, where the stakes are too big, they're too silly. I can't wrap my head around that. Sorry, that's too silly. And it loses that impact where I'm like on tenterhooks wanting to know what happens next, because now I'm like, well, if this can happen, then nothing really matters. And I think that's the balance you've got to find.
Yeah, and you're right that the Spider run does that exceptionally well. I mean, and Court of Owls definitely does that, where Bruce is kind of discovering stuff about the history of Gotham and his family, as the story goes on, and him being underground and lost in the maze and stuff really stuck in my mind. And definitely Death of the Family does that too, where the stakes, you tremendous sense of stakes, but you're right. It's you know, it's very psychological. It's very character based. It's not, you know. Now I remember, you know, reading Batman comics in the 90s, where it was like, you know, they did Contagion, you know, where it's like a plague hits Gotham City, and then they did Cataclysm, where an earthquake hits Gotham City. You know, it's like, you know, every Batman event was like, we are going to level half of the city, and then, admittedly, I like No Man's Land quite a bit, but for a year, all of Gotham is just, you're not part of the United States anymore. You're just, you know, like, you know, I mean, there's nothing we can do to Gotham that hasn't been done.
No, and that's it. Like you say, you get to. And I actually agree. I think No Man's Land is actually quite good fun, but it's almost one of the things where like that's them dealing with the aftermath of these great events. But those great events like shouldn't have happened. Like they just seem, like you say. It's one of those again where it happens in a shared universe, and it's become more apparent, I think, with things like the MCU. Why is there anybody when you've got things like the Justice League? Why is anybody still living in Gotham in No Man's Land? Like, why hasn't Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, these ones that, like, you know, max power level kind of sort of superheroes, why haven't they come in and just been like, oh, we'll clear all this up in a couple of weeks?
Right, exactly. And there was some justification. You know, there were like a couple of Justice League issues that tied into that, and there was some sort of, you know, shitty justification for that. Like about, you know, not wanting to alienate the U.S. government or something, you know. But, you know, you know, at least they addressed it, but it was so unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like you get one of the stories, right? I mean, you can have, like, a poison gas attack in Gotham that, you know, like at the end of Batman Begins or whatever. I mean, you know, you can do a story like that, but you kind of get one.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, don't make your entire run one series of horrible events after another, because then you run into the problem of just sort of, A, why is anyone living in Gotham anymore? B, it doesn't mean anything to me as a reader anymore. You know, once you've seen, you know, I mean, there is this kind of confusion of, you know, Ultron's going to destroy the world. Well, you know, that's big stakes. Well, it is on paper, but it doesn't feel like it, right? I mean, Court of Owls feels big stakes. I mean, Death of the Family feels big stakes. But you're right. I mean, you wouldn't even notice these things except for one night, you know, which is like, you know, it'd be a bigger deal if, you know, a member of the Penguin Gang shot up, you know, the house, the apartment beneath you or something.
And that's it. I think, you know, I think that's why I think superhero comics are wonderful. I think, you know, there's some fantastic ones. But for me, and you know, again, it's that thing of everyone's opinion. Everyone's different. Everyone does different things. I do like those smaller stories, those more personal stories. You know, where it gets down to, and I'm not talking about high drama, but where it's like the impact. If I get a run of you know, stories where it's like you say, it's just trauma after trauma after trauma. Like after a while, I just sort of you tune it out. And that's, you know, so you either get, and that's again, like, you know, I mentioned like Ed Brubaker's Captain America run, that, you know, that ends in some, that's got some sort of like major stuff goes on in that run that impacts on a world stage, but it's sort of, it's not every issue. There are issues that are really downplayed and sort of like just conversations between sort of like Bucky and Falcon, or sort of you know, Sharon Carter, and there's those moments that you go, oh, we're back down to that level. I can just have those. I can see how these things are actually having an effect on them and how they're sort of dealing with it and where their head's at. Right, we can ratchet it back up again now. And then there are other runs in series where you just sort of, it's just like, okay, now we've leveled this city, and now I'm going to go do this, and now we're going to, you know, we're going to have something on the moon, and then you think, yeah, but I can't keep working at that level because I just sort of lose interest.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like the Apocalypse War in Judge Dredd, right? Where you know, what did they kill? Like
Yeah.
You can't do that every few years, right? I mean, like the first time you do that, it's a big deal. And the audience goes, wow, you're really shaking things up. But then time goes on and you realize, like there is, I mean, even in the 90s, I mean, obviously we're in the, the New 52 or DC Rebirth, whatever we want to call it now. But, even in the 90s, a year after No Man's Land, a year after Contagion, it's like a third of Gotham died by plague. People are vomiting blood in the street. A year later, nobody even references it. It's just like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happened. Remember when aliens invaded New York and, the Avengers were busy trashing buildings? Oh yeah, that's a thing.
That's the thing. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you referenced Judge Dredd, and that's a really good sort of point where that is an evolving continuity. Like, everything that's happened from 1977 onwards has happened and still has consequences. I mean, even as recent as, I think, in the last 6 years, they had a consequence from the Apocalypse War. So there was a story that ran where a general that had been blinded by the attack that Dredd actually instigated back on the Soviet bloc, and he sort of formed this underground force and attacked Mega City, but it wasn't like a major thing. He just attacked Dredd and some other bits. But again, like, that story still has weight, and I think that's sort of the thing of, like, it's. I mean, that's not to say that everything in the Judge Dredd continuity is great and should ever be used again, but everything that's happened has happened, and I love the fact that, like you say, things still carry weight. Like, there are still parts. It grows and shrinks. I know that in Mega City swears, but there are still parts of the city they can't go into because of Necropolis. There's still parts of the city they've got this and that.
Right.
That, like you say, has stakes, because then they'll have a year of just small stories where it's people on the judges on the street, or they'll go off planet or whatever, and it's just it's a smaller story, so you can build up to those big events. But yeah, I don't know. I find I'm.
Yeah, I read that story about the general. He's got like the last bomb, and he's going to complete his mission from the Apocalypse War. And there is that sense of like, oh, I thought the coolest part of that story was for me was the idea of like, if he succeeds, Mega City 1 did not win the Apocalypse War. Right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a possibility that we've been wrong about this the whole time, and we're just at this kind of like interregnum period, this Cold War before, the Eastern Bloc, got its revenge. Yeah, I mean, I dig that. And in fact, that's one of the things that I can't stand about superhero continuity is, is the endless reboots, the endless kind of retcons. And you see it even in talking about Ra's al Ghul. Like by the time you get to the third graphic novel, O'Neill comes back, and O'Neill doesn't want to. He's the guy who's created Ra's, so he doesn't want to honor, like, Talia's had a kid. And he just retcons the previous two graphic novels out of existence.
Yeah.
And Talia even talks about her mom, and it's like, no, that's not what you just established.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. That's pretty annoying. But, you do have these gems like, Snyder's Batman came out of that, but you do have these gems come out of that even within this kind of endlessly rebooting continuity, you have these great stories told, but it does feel lessened to me by the fact that it doesn't have in both of our selections, that it doesn't have that continuing Judge Dredd kind of thing.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think, Marvel are just as, even if not more so, sort of guilty of that. The sort of the relaunching with the number one, that you get to a point where you're like, I wouldn't even know where to jump in. Like, where do I start? But I recently took a bit of a stab, and I've just read volume. I literally finished it today. I just finished volume 1 of The Immortal Hulk, written by Al Ewing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
right.
it's wonderful. Like, it's brilliant. I've read the first 5 issues now in this first volume, and it's brilliant. And it's one of those where you go, okay, it's Bruce Banner on the run. He's on the streets. It's very sort of like, it's very much like the Incredible Hulk TV show, but it's now got this real sort of like horror element now, where it's not when he gets angry. He can get activated when he gets angry, but also it's almost like nightly. Like, the Hulk comes out at night, and it's sort of, it's going to happen. So he now needs to look for something to direct that rage, and that it's almost like, every night I've got a nuclear weapon that's going to go off. Can I use that in the best possible way? Like,
that's really cool. Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
It's really good. I'm not going to spoil anything in it because it's really well done, and you don't need to know anything that's gone before. Like, you don't need to know anything. Like, Al Ewing's written it, so he's sort of like, yeah, all this stuff's happened, and I know that, but this is what I'm dealing with, and it goes back to that original idea of what the Hulk would be from when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby obviously created it. And he's sort of like, it's so good that this is a starting point. It's like, oh yeah, just step in here, and we will give you this character. And I highly recommend it. So Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk is that one of those gems where you're like, the stakes are really good because it's creating its own world, where this isn't an earth-ending, a globe-shattering story. This is literally him trying to deal with this problem that he now has, and it's but it's introducing these new elements in each issue. It's really good, really good, really loving it. But
well, I've heard good things. I've got to check it out. But I mean, I like, besides the sense of like small stakes, the sense of like, sort of like boiling these stories down to, you were talking about like, sort of returning to the sort of like Hulk as monster, the sort of, Stan Lee thing, which, I mean, those original stories are a lot closer to like werewolf stories than they are to superhero stories. Structurally in terms of how this transformation works and everything. It reminds me of, sort of the ways that both of us have chosen Batman stories that are sort of rollicking adventures, that are fun and are fun on this particular level where they're thoughtful, there's intelligent stuff going on, but they're these sort of like Batman as adventure yarn.
Yes.
But in this particular Batman way, that so often we get, Batman as superhero hanging out with the Justice League, or Batman as like sort of, ultra street level. I mean, you were talking about some of the Brubaker stuff. I think he does that pretty well, but I don't know that I want to reread most of it.
And that's what I mean. Like you say, it was fine to read it once, but it's the rereadability, that adventure element that I can go back and I can enjoy those elements of the story that I think are just fun and just interesting and like you said, they're pushing their luck. They're really pushing their luck on some of these, and I think it's fantastic that they do that. And I think the other thing, you said they're both rollicking adventures, and I think it's clear that for both the sort of the O'Neill stuff and the Snyder stuff, both of them have introduced elements that have stuck around. Like you said, there was stuff in that run that is now a definitive part of canon for the O'Neill stuff. Like I say, you introduced Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul and those elements that others have now have built upon. And the same with Snyder. Like, he put things in that run that even it came out in 2011, I think, was the New 52. So you sort of we're 8 years later, and it's not a great deal of time later, but there's still building on that. Like, those characters still come up, and those sort of ideas are still being built upon. So they're really sort of they are milestones, but they're milestones not because they invite analysis like The Killing Joke or Dark Knight Returns or Arkham Asylum, but because they're just so enjoyable that people are going to be accessing them and I think rereading them for so long to come.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think it's amazing to see, going back in, finding this O'Neill stuff, and reading some of the stuff around it. I'm amazed by how few Ra's appearances there are until the 90s. And the same is true, of Man-Bat and obviously Hugo Strange, had one appearance before Englehart Rogers took it up, and it's amazing how we're talking about elements that we now regard as just quintessential parts of the Batman mythos, but that didn't necessarily seem so at the time. That it was within a relatively small period of years that they became that. And it's easy to see now, rereading that stuff, you think, Roz could have been forgotten. I mean, there were years that he wasn't used. There's no indication that he necessarily even needs to come back. And I think that Court of Owls shows that same kind of not only versatility, but that same kind of rapid incorporation into the Batman mythos. If anything, it's been faster with Snyder.
I think that's just a thing of the times, though, isn't it? I think everything's faster these days, so everyone jumps on the bandwagon pretty quick. A lot of content to fill. But yeah, no, I think these are both great stories, and I think for those that are listening, I highly recommend going back and finding sort of those O'Neill stories. Whether you go onto Comixology or you find them on wherever you can buy these. In fact, there are two beautiful collections that are sort of exclusively the Denny O'Neill and Neil Adam stories in big hardback, and they're really nice. But these are readily available to go and seek out, I think.
And the Snyder stuff is all available in trade, and as well as in big collections. And you can even get these flip-based hardcover with an owl mask.
Yes.
I think they did a Joker face one too.
They did, yes. But they did a sort of a run of them, because they started with the Court of Owls, and then they did the Joker face, which I don't have. I don't have that one. But then they also did the Deathstroke mask, and they also did the Harley Quinn one as well. So I don't have those. Just the Court of Owls, which hangs on my wall in where all my comics and my books are. So pride of place. Yeah,
it does have that kind of. I do like the mask. It does have a kind of Venetian look to it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's one of those things. I think that Capullo's style lends very well to those sorts of characters. I could talk about Capullo art forever, because I think sort of his ability to sort of craft just little, as we said, Snyder writes great character flourishes, but Capullo draws them, and sort of you can go back to a page, and just the sort of I know he sort of I follow him on social media, and I know that he sort of he pains over how would this character stand to deliver this line, all this other stuff, and so he has those sort of things, and then he adds things into the background to make things look real. He will never do just a plain panel. It will always be, okay, well, they're in a library, so it's going to be oak panel walls, and there's going to be this and there's going to be that, and so his background's always incredibly detailed, and I just think his art he's just, he takes his, he's not the fastest, but he always sort of seems to deliver, but I just think his characters and his presentation is superb, and I think
what I really admire him for, and what I think he's great at, is I always, this is going to seem so silly, but I always know what's happening. And, visual storytelling is so tricky. And when you look at, there are many artists who, they can be a very fine artist. I can admire their technique brilliantly, but, I'll read a panel and I'll think, I'm not entirely sure what happened there. I think the Batmobile turned a corner, but it might have crashed, and it's only like 2 pages later that I'm totally sure what happened. I never have a moment like that with Capullo. I always know exactly what's going on, and the characters are very energetic, and I'm right there in the story. It's communicating visually everything that I need to follow that story in a way that actually is very hard to do.
Yeah, he's a master of the art, and like you say, of storytelling. Not just his art's very pretty, but of that storytelling, of utilising that page to direct you around, what is going on, and telling the story. Yeah, I think others do just, I'm not going to name anybody. I think that's poor taste, but you're right. There are artists where I can look at a page and I have to read it, or I have to or even the panels don't seem to follow an organic pattern that you can completely follow what's going on, which I find frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's
I hope readers check this stuff out, and I have actually learned more about Batman by talking with you, and I think we've really kind of honed down on this, this sort of look, I mean, we appreciate Dark Knight, we appreciate Killing Joke, and we've had conversations about this stuff, but, that at the end of the day, we both kind of chose stuff that has that sense of arcing adventure tied with some smart twists and themes.
Agreed. And I think that's where the fun is. That's what comics are all about, is that sort of thing of when they're at their best, they tell a really fun story that you are hugely invested in, and you're clawing for that next issue. That's when they or you can't put it down. They work like a book, and you just can't put it down issue to issue. I think that's when they work, and both what you and I have I think have put on the table are great examples of that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that actually helps me to understand Batman better and what works with Batman.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back and even think about. I read Court of Owls for this, but obviously we got onto Death of the Family, and I haven't read the Demon trilogy, so I need to read those. I've got those, so I will be putting some time aside to read those books in the next week or so.
And I'm going to reread Snyder. I read through the first 12, but I'm going to reread the rest of the run after this.
Yeah, it's worth doing. I'll be interested to see it, what you think about it. Yeah, after having gone through all, I'll be interested to see what you think about it.
Well, let's do it again.
Yeah, we will. We'll get back and we'll talk about that. Actually, we'll do that. We'll put that in. But Julian, as always, it's fantastic to have the show, and I really appreciate your time and your contribution.
You too, brother, and it is my pleasure, and I can't tell you how much this means to me, how great it is, and I come away every time feeling that I learned something, and I've thought about things in a different way.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we'll put something in the diary for the future. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The second part of the discussion between Julian and I about our favourite Batman stories. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll go back and you'll take some time to look at those early 70s and 80s runs, the saga of Ra's al Ghul, the Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil stuff. And of course, more modern, for me, especially the New 52 stuff for Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, starting with the Court of Owls. Fantastic run, fantastic book, amazing art, amazing writing. I highly recommend them all. But thank you, as usual, for listening in. It's greatly appreciated. We've got some great stuff coming up over the summer. A couple of big retrospectives coming later in this year. I think we've already advertised them. We're going to be doing the full Predator run. That's right, all the Predator films. And then later in the year, leading up to a weekend of release review, we are going to be doing the Terminator films as well. Now that's going to be a bit bumpy, I feel, and hopefully the best for this new film. So, thank you, as I say, for listening in. And if you want to help and support the show, get in contact. Find us on social media and tweet us. Say hello. Always loving talking to fans of the show. Or drop me an email at 20thCenturyGeek@gmail.com. And if you want to take your support further, we do have a Patreon page. And it is chock full of good stuff. Every month I do a review of a film that probably hasn't got the best reputation, and ask the question, is it really that bad? Got some big good ones coming up on that as well. And also monthly for the higher up subscribers, I sit down with my non-nerdy wife and Alex, and we watch something that she's probably never watched before. So far we did Batman 66, tying right into this show, and recently we also did Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So if you want us to do certain things for that, if you want Alex to watch specific things, let me know. She's actually quite game for all kinds of things. And finally, we also have an Amazon wish list chock full of wonderful research books that will help us in the future. And if you want to send one, if you want to donate, we at 20th Century Towers love second-hand books. Okay, well, thank you for listening in, and I'll see you again soon.